In 1814, a duke walked into a small-town library and said 5 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "She's not worth my attention." He was wrong. He knew it by the time he reached the door. It took him until December to admit it. The lending library at Mossfield occupied the ground floor of a building that had been, at various points in its history, a chandler's shop, a solicitor's office, and briefly, according to local memory, a place where a man named Hobbs had sold dubious remedies for gout. It retained from these former lives a smell of tallow and old paper, a floor that sloped slightly toward the east, and a window seat along the south wall that caught the afternoon light from October through to March, when the light was worth catching. On the 14th of October, a Thursday at 2:30 in the afternoon, the window seat was occupied. The young woman in it had arranged herself with the ease of long habit, one foot tucked beneath her, a book open across her knee, a half-eaten apple on the sill beside her that she appeared to have forgotten entirely. She was not pretty in any way that announced itself. She was the sort of face that took time and rewarded it. Dark hair, simply dressed, a woolen shawl in a shade of blue that had once been more definite. She turned a page without looking up. In the back room, the faint sound of Mrs. Petworth moving along the shelves, the late chandler's widow who came on Tuesdays and Thursdays to keep the place in order and who had the gift of being present without being intrusive, provided the library's only other sign of occupation. The bell above the door sounded. The young woman did not look up for that either. "The catalogue," said a male voice, "appears to be organized on a principle I cannot immediately identify." "It's alphabetical by subject," she said, still reading. "The subjects are in Latin." A pause. "That explains it." She turned another page. "The history of science is under Scientia, natural philosophy under Philosophia Naturalis. If you want novels, they're in the back under Inutilia, which was Mr. Petworth's little joke, and which no one has corrected since he died." "Mr. Petworth was the librarian?" "Mr. Petworth was the chandler. He donated the shelving. The catalogue was my doing." Another pause, longer. "You catalogued the library." "When I was 19, I've since thought of several improvements." She looked up. He was standing in the middle of the room with his hat in his hand, and an expression she could not quite categorize. Not rude, not warm, precisely calibrated to reveal nothing. Tall, well-made, dressed with the kind of understatement that either meant very old money or very careful economy. Hazel eyes. He was looking at her as though recalibrating something. "You're blocking the natural philosophy section," she said. He stepped to the left without comment. She returned to her book. He moved along the shelves with a quiet that suggested he was accustomed to rooms that arranged themselves around him, and had not yet noticed that this one would not. He pulled out a volume, examined the spine, put it back, pulled out another. "Is there something specific?" she said without looking up. "Or are you grazing?" "Grazing," he said, a beat. "Is that permitted?" "The library has no rules on the subject. Mr. Petworth's spirit may object, but he has been reliably quiet for 11 years. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. He moved further along the shelf. She read 3 more pages, which was less than she normally managed in that time, though she did not examine why. At length he came to stand near the window, a book in hand, and looked at the seat beside her with the specific blankness of a man who wanted something and was deciding whether to want it out loud. "There is," she said, not looking up, "a perfectly adequate chair by the desk." "There is," he agreed. "It appears to have a broken leg." "It does. I've been meaning to mention it to someone. You are, as I understand it, the person who runs this library. I volunteer here on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It is not the same thing." She looked up again. "The light is better at the window." "I had noticed." "I arrived at 2. "I arrived at 2:30. "Then the arithmetic is straightforward." He looked at her for a moment. Then he took himself and his book to the 3-legged chair, which he righted with a piece of folded paper from his coat pocket, and sat in it with the composure of a man who had decided, on reflection, that this was exactly where he had intended to be. Beatrice read another page. The folded paper solution to the chair was either the action of a man with good instincts or the action of a man who was never without the means to solve small problems. She could not decide which was more telling. She did not look up again for 20 minutes. When she did, he was gone. He had left the book he'd been reading face down on the edge of the shelf, Observations on the Theory of the Tides, by a Professor Allenworth, which was not where it belonged, and on top of it, as a bookmark, the piece of folded paper. She picked it up. It was a bill of sale from Aldenvale Estate for 3 horses and a quantity of hay made out to a tenant named Griggs. The name at the top of the bill, in the pre-printed copper plate of the estate's own stationery, read, His Grace the Duke of Aldenvale. She set it down. She set it down carefully, went back to the window seat and looked out at the market square, where a man in an excellent coat was climbing into a very good carriage, and where Lord Calloway, leaning against the wheel with his arms folded, was apparently in the middle of saying something enormously funny to himself. Beatrice picked up her apple. It was cold. She ate it anyway. The supper at the Norris house that evening was the kind of small earnest affair that Mossfield produced reliably. 8 people around a table that comfortably seated 6, 2 of the candles unmatched, and Mrs. Norris in a state of ambient anxiety that expressed itself in the oversalting of the soup. Nicholas sat between Colonel Norris and a clergyman whose name he had already lost, and spent the better part of the first course being told about the drainage problems on the east field of a farm he owned but had not visited in 4 years. He listened with the portion of his attention that could be spared for drainage and directed the rest toward the question of why he had left the library when he did. He had not been asked to leave. The young woman had not looked up. The chair had been serviceable enough. He had simply left, without the book he had actually wanted, which was somewhere on the shelf behind where she had been sitting, and which he had not retrieved because retrieving it would have required passing within arm's reach of her, which had seemed at the moment like a thing to avoid. This was new information about himself. He filed it under irrelevant and moved on. "A nasty piece of work, that catalogue," said Colonel Norris, apparently having moved on from drainage. "All in Latin. My daughter couldn't make head nor tail of it." "Someone explained the system to me," Nicholas said. "It's logical once you understand the principle." "Who explained it?" "I don't know her name." "Dark hair, blue shawl." The colonel gestured vaguely toward the south end of the table. "That'd be Beatrice Claywell, Vicar's daughter. Clever girl. Too clever, some say, but I never held it against her." He lowered his voice in the way of a man sharing something he considered delicate. "She catalogued the whole library herself, when she was 19. Remarkable, really. Not that it does her much good." "Why not?" The colonel looked mildly surprised to be asked. "Well, you know." He reached for the wine. "Vicar's daughter." Nicholas looked at his soup. Later, after the colonel had moved on to the matter of a disputed fence line, after the clergyman had recovered his voice to discuss the theological implications of a recent pamphlet that no one else had read, after the fish course had been cleared and the lamb brought in with a sauce that Calloway pronounced excellent and Nicholas pronounced adequate, Calloway leaned across the corner of the table. "You're thinking about something," Calloway said. "I am frequently thinking about something. This is a different variety of thinking." "Your powers of observation," Nicholas said, "continue to astound. Who was the woman in the market today, the one at the library window?" Nicholas turned his wine glass once. "I have no idea what you mean." Calloway smiled the smile of a man who has all the time in the world. "Of course not." "She was a local girl. She volunteers at the library." He paused. "She's not worth my attention." "Naturally," said Calloway, and helped himself to more lamb. The following Tuesday was sharp and clear, the kind of October morning that apologizes for nothing. Beatrice had been to Mrs. Fenn's house at 8 to return a borrowed preserving pan, and had left 40 minutes later with the pan still in her hands and the following information lodged in her mind like a splinter. The man from the library was Nicholas Sinclair, Duke of Aldenvale. He was 32. He was unmarried. He had not been to the estate in 3 years, or possibly 4. Mrs. Fenn was inconsistent on this point, owing to some business in London, and before that, some unpleasantness with a woman whose name Mrs. Fenn did not know, but whose behaviour she was prepared to characterize extensively. He had a friend staying with him, Lord Calloway, who had been seen at the butcher's that morning and had an extremely agreeable smile. The estate employed 40-odd people from the village and its surrounds, and His Grace's arrival had caused the kind of low-level civic excitement that a market town produces when something interrupts the ordinary. Beatrice walked home, set the preserving pan on the kitchen table and sat down. She thought about the folded piece of paper, the bill of sale, His Grace the Duke of Aldenvale. She thought about "the catalogue was my doing," which she had said to a duke while he stood in the middle of her library, blocking the natural philosophy section. She thought about your grazing. She stood up. She took her shawl from the hook by the door, told her father she would be back for lunch and walked to the library. He was in the window seat. He had a book open across one knee, the actual book she could now identify as Observations on the Theory of the Tides, retrieved from the shelf, and he looked up when she opened the door with the expression of a man who has arrived early somewhere and knows it. In the back room, Mrs. Petworth's quiet industry continued undisturbed. "Miss Claywell," he said. So he had made inquiries, or the small machinery of a small town had done it for him. "Your Grace," she said. It landed between them with a small, precise weight. His expression did not change, which told her something. Neither did hers, which told him something in return. "The chair has been repaired," he said. There was, she noted, a proper wedge of wood under the broken leg now, not paper. Someone from the estate had been sent, presumably that morning. "So I see." She crossed to the shelves and found the book she had come for. "Thank you." It seemed practical. It was. She opened her book, standing. "It's Tuesday. I'm here until 4. "I'm aware of the schedule," he said. "I asked." She looked at him. He looked back with complete composure. The morning light came through the south window and caught the hazel of his eyes, which were, she noted with some irritation, rather fine. "You could move," he said, to the chair. "I could," she agreed, and sat down on the opposite end of the window seat. There was a foot of space between them. It was a long seat. She opened her book. He turned a page of his. Outside, the market square went about its business. A cart, a dog, 2 women with baskets, the butcher's boy, at a run. At 11:30, without looking up, she said, "The tides." "I beg your pardon?" "You came back for a book about tides in October, in a landlocked county." He considered this for a moment. "I read broadly." "You came Thursday for a book you couldn't find, because you were distracted. And you came back today with a pretext." A pause. "That," he said carefully, "is a very direct observation. I volunteer here Tuesdays and Thursdays. I notice when people come without knowing what they want." "And what," he said, still looking at his book, "do you conclude when that happens?" "Usually that they want company and won't admit it." She turned a page. "Occasionally that they want quiet and have run out of it at home." "And in my case?" She looked at him. "I haven't decided yet." He held her gaze for a moment, then returned to the tides. The first week of November arrived in Mossfield, carrying cold mornings, the smell of wood smoke from every chimney in the square, and the persistent rumour, upgraded from speculation to near certainty by Tuesday, that the Duke of Aldenvale was not, in fact, leaving as soon as originally supposed. Lord Calloway was observed at the posting inn without luggage, which meant he was not departing. The estate steward, a Mr. Holt, was seen twice at the solicitor's office on the High Street, which suggested paperwork. Paperwork suggested duration. Mossfield, which understood these signals with the precision of a community that had very little else to read, concluded that the Duke's 2 weeks at most had become something more indefinite and adjusted accordingly. Beatrice concluded nothing. She noted that the library's window seat was occupied every Tuesday and Thursday when she arrived, that Observations on the Theory of the Tides had been replaced by a volume on Roman land surveys, and that the Roman land surveys had been followed by a collection of philosophical correspondence that she had catalogued under Philosophia Moralis, and which she knew for a fact had not been touched in 6 years. Mrs. Petworth, shelving quietly in the back, had begun to time her tea to the precise hour when the conversation at the window seat became most animated, and had said nothing about this to anyone, which was the most useful thing she could have done. "You're working through the P's," Beatrice said on the 2nd Thursday of November. "I am reading what interests me. I started at Philosophia Naturalis, and you are now at Philosophia Moralis. That is alphabetical, Your Grace, not interest. Perhaps my interests are alphabetical." "They are not. You asked me last week what I thought of Locke. A general question. You had an opinion already formed. You wanted to know if I disagreed. And did you?" "On the question of innate ideas, yes, substantially." He looked up. "You didn't say so." "You didn't ask." There was a pause of the kind that had begun to occur between them, with some regularity. Not uncomfortable, not empty, but occupied by something that neither of them was yet naming. "Tell me now," he said. She told him. It took 12 minutes and required him to go back to the shelf for a second volume, which she could have told him he'd need, but didn't, because watching him discover it himself was more instructive. He argued well, not to win, she noticed, but to understand, and when she made a point he found sound, he conceded it without theatre. This was rarer than it should have been in a man of his position. By the time the church clock struck 1, they had covered lock the problem of personal identity, and a brief diversion into whether the library's copy of Hume was the first or second edition, which turned out to matter to neither of them, but which occupied another 10 minutes pleasantly. "You read philosophy at home?" he said at length. "My father has a reasonable library. He was at Oxford." "And taught you?" "He taught me what he knew. I taught myself the rest." She paused. "It is what one does when there is no other option." He was quiet for a moment. "You might have gone to—" He stopped. "To where, Your Grace?" He looked out the window. "I was going to say something both obvious and useless." "Yes," she said, "you were." He acknowledged this with a slight incline of his head, which was, she was beginning to understand, his version of a concession. It was Calloway who invited Reverend Claywell to dine. Nicholas had not suggested it. He had not, if asked, been able to explain why Calloway had done it either, except that Calloway had a talent for engineering situations that appeared casual and were not. He had mentioned, in passing, that he found the local clergyman interesting, had encountered him at the bookseller's, had a conversation about the Greek text of something, and that it would be pleasant to have him at the estate for dinner. Nicholas had said it was Calloway's invitation to extend. The dinner was on a Wednesday, which was not a library day. Beatrice came because her father did not go places without her, which was not dependence, but habit. She wore a gown of dark green that was well made, and 2 years old, and suited her considerably better than it suited the occasion, which was the kind of thing Nicholas noticed, and did not know why he noticed. She was different in his house. Not diminished. Nothing about Beatrice Claywell diminished in unfamiliar surroundings, but altered, the way a person is altered when they are on ground that belongs to someone else. She looked at the portraits in the hall without comment. She listened to Calloway with the attentive expression of someone filing away information. When the conversation at dinner turned to the estate's history, she asked 2 questions that suggested she knew its history better than its owner did, which was probably true. "You know the place," he said during a pause between courses. "I grew up 2 miles from it." She set down her glass. "Everyone in Mossfield knows Aldenvale. We just don't often see inside it." "And what do you make of the inside?" She looked around the dining room with its tall windows and somewhat austere furnishings. "It looks like a house where no one has made a decision about comfort in 20 years. Calloway made a sound into his wineglass. "The furniture," Nicholas said, "is excellent quality," she said, "entirely unlived in. There are no books in this room, no correspondence, nothing that suggests the room is used for anything but formal occasions. The drawing room, I suspect, is the same." "The drawing room," Calloway offered helpfully, "has 1 book. It belongs to me. I brought it from London." She looked at Nicholas. He said nothing, which was a kind of answer. After dinner in the drawing room, which was, as advertised, largely empty of evidence of habitation, Reverend Claywell and Calloway fell into an earnest discussion of Greek verb forms that showed every sign of lasting the rest of the evening. Mrs. Petworth was not present, but propriety was maintained by the Reverend's own presence, which served the purpose more naturally than any chaperone could have arranged. Nicholas found himself standing at the drawing-room's largest window. It looked south over the grounds, toward the lights of Mossfield in the middle distance. Beside him, having drifted there without announcement, was Beatrice. "On a clear day," she said, looking out, "you can make out the library's roofline from here. At least I always thought so growing up." "Can you?" "The slate is a different color from the coaching inn beside it." She looked out at the darkness. "I've wondered sometimes what Mossfield looks like from a distance, whether it looks as self-contained as it feels." "Small," he said. "Particular, like something that knows its own edges." She glanced at him. "That is either a criticism or a compliment." "I haven't decided." She looked back at the window. In the glass faintly he could see her reflection, the dark green of her gown, the composed line of her profile, and he looked at that rather than at her directly, which was less honest but more manageable. They stood there for a while. Behind them, Calloway said something about the heiress tense that made the Reverend laugh. Neither of them turned around. "Why did you stay?" she said. "You were meant to leave after a fortnight." "Estate business." "Mr. Holt is perfectly capable of managing estate business." "There were papers requiring my signature." "There are posts." "Some matters," he said, "require a personal presence." She turned to look at him, and he felt it the way you feel a change in weather. Not saw, felt. He kept his eyes on the window. Yes, she said after a moment. I imagine they do. She moved away to join her father. He stayed at the window for another 10 minutes, which was long enough for Calloway to notice and short enough to pretend otherwise. The letter from his mother arrived on the 17th of November, a Wednesday. It was 3 pages, which was efficient for his mother, who was capable of 6 on the subject of the weather. The first page addressed the usual concerns: the London house, a legal matter concerning a cousin, a reminder about a charitable obligation he had technically fulfilled in August. The second page arrived at its subject with the particular indirectness of a woman who had never been indirect in her life, but believed in the appearance of it. Lady Sophronia Vane. The Vanes were a good family. Sophronia was accomplished, well-regarded, sensible. His mother used the word sensible twice, which meant she considered it the paramount virtue. The match would be suitable. Everyone agreed it would be suitable. Lord and Lady Vane had mentioned, with perfect casualness, that Sophronia might be travelling north in late November and would be happy to call at Aldenvale if His Grace happened to be in residence. The third page was devoted to the observation that Nicholas was 32, and that time, while not yet alarming, was moving. He read all 3 pages. He folded the letter. He went to his desk and wrote back 2 paragraphs. The legal matter would be handled. The charitable obligation had been handled. He was in residence until the end of November, and left the subject of Lady Sophronia Vane in the space between one sentence and the next, where it sat without being addressed. He sealed the letter. He did not go to the library that afternoon, because it was a Wednesday and not a library day, and because that was the only reason. The following Thursday, she was not in the window seat when he arrived. He sat down with his book. He was onto the cues now, a consequence of claiming to read alphabetically, and waited. She came in at 2:15 with her shawl damp at the shoulders and an expression that suggested she had been hurrying. "It's raining," she said unnecessarily. "It is?" She set down her bag, unwound her shawl, and came to the window seat with the contained momentum of a woman who has been walking fast. She sat down, looked out at the grey square, looked at the book on his knee, which was a volume of collected letters by a philosopher whose name he could not have recalled at that moment if required. "I was at Mrs. Harding's," she said. "She's unwell." "I'm sorry to hear it." "She'll recover. She doesn't want to particularly, but she will." She opened her own book. "She asked me to read to her and then fell asleep, and I couldn't leave because she'd have woken if the door opened." "So you sat?" "So I sat." She looked at her book. "With nothing to do, I don't sit well." I had noticed. She glanced at him. "How long have you been here?" "Since 2. She looked at the clock on the wall, which read 2:30. "You waited." He turned a page. "I had my book." This was true. It was also not the whole truth, and from the quality of her silence she knew it. She turned to her own book without pursuing it, which was either courtesy or strategy, and he was not certain which. The rain moved in properly around 3 o'clock. The square emptied. The windows streamed with it. They read, and occasionally one of them said something, and the other answered, and the afternoon went the way Thursday afternoons in November go when you are not paying attention to time. At 4:10 she said, "You've never asked what I read." Cecilia by Fanny Burney. Before that, the 2nd volume of A Natural History of British Birds, which you borrowed 2 Tuesdays ago and have not yet returned. Before that, a translation of Montaigne that you found wanting. She stared at him. "I notice things," he said with great composure, "when I am ostensibly reading about philosophy." A long pause. "That," she said, "is either very flattering or very alarming." "Possibly both." "Possibly." She closed her book. It was 4:00. She was already later than she meant to be. She gathered her things, wound her still damp shawl around her shoulders. At the door, she stopped. "The birds," she said. "I'll bring it back Tuesday." "There's no hurry," he said, looking at his book. She left. The bell above the door sounded. He sat in the window seat in the empty library and looked at the page he was on, which he had read 3 times, and finally accepted that he would not make further progress today. He told Calloway nothing about the letter. This lasted 4 days, which was longer than it usually lasted, because Calloway had a particular sensitivity to information being withheld and treated silence on Nicholas's part as a direct provocation. "Your mother has written," Calloway said on Sunday evening. "My mother frequently writes." "This one required 3 pages and left you in a mood for 4 days." I am not in a mood. You rode out to the East Field and back this morning for no reason that Holt could identify. I was inspecting the drainage. Nicholas. Calloway set down his glass. Who is she? Nicholas looked at the fire. Lady Sophronia Vane. You may know the family. A pause. I know them. She's... Calloway seemed to choose his word carefully. She is exactly what your mother would choose. Yes. And? And she may visit in late November. And? Nicholas turned his glass once. And nothing. The matter has not been decided. Calloway was quiet for a moment, then, You are 32 years old. My mother has mentioned this. And you have been in Mossfield for 6 weeks, which was meant to be 2. And in that time you have visited a lending library approximately 14 times and come back on 11 of those occasions without a book. Nicholas said nothing. I am your oldest friend, Calloway said not unkindly, and I am telling you that I can see exactly what is happening, and that you should think carefully about what you intend to do about it, because a woman like Beatrice Claywell does not wait indefinitely for a man to make up his mind. Nothing is happening. Then you are in no danger whatsoever, said Calloway pleasantly, and I have worried for nothing. He picked up his glass. Nicholas looked at the fire. The house was very quiet in the way that large, underlived houses tend to be quiet, not peacefully but vacantly, and outside the drawing-room window, 2 miles south, the lights of Mossfield were small and specific in the dark. Lady Sophronia Vane arrived on the 22nd of November, a Monday, with her aunt, Mrs. Partridge, a quantity of luggage appropriate to a 3-day visit, and the composed expression of a woman who has been placed in a situation and has decided to conduct herself with credit. She was 28, fair, possessed of very good manners and a quality of attention that made people feel correctly that she was listening to everything. She was not beautiful in a way that provoked comment, but she was the kind of woman who became better looking the longer you knew her, which is the more durable variety. Nicholas met her in the hall, performed the necessary courtesies, and recognized within 10 minutes that she was considerably more intelligent than the arrangement required her to be. This was either a relief or a complication. He had not yet determined which. You have a fine estate, she said at dinner, with the tone of someone making an honest observation rather than a compliment. It requires more attention than I have given it, he said. Most things do. Calloway, across the table, met Nicholas's eyes with an expression of studied innocence. Sophronia asked good questions about the estate, about the tenants, about Mossfield itself. She was interested in everything with the even, unhurried interest of a person who finds the world genuinely worth examining. Nicholas answered. Calloway answered more. Mrs. Partridge addressed herself to the turbot and the wine in that order, and said very little. After dinner, in the drawing-room, Mrs. Partridge settled into the largest armchair by the fire with the decisive comfort of a woman who has chaperoned many evenings and knows that half-sleep is both permitted and strategic. Her eyes closed within 10 minutes. Calloway had conveniently discovered an urgent letter requiring a response at the writing desk in the corner, which put him in the room and effectively out of it. Sophronia sat with Nicholas near the second window, the fire between them and Mrs. Partridge, and they talked for an hour with the ease of 2 people who have no history and no particular illusions. I should tell you, she said at one point, that I was not informed of the specifics of this visit until a fortnight ago. Nor was I in any detail. And yet here we both are. Here we both are. She looked at the fire. I have no objection to you, she said. I want to be clear about that. You are not, this is not... She paused, selecting her words with care. I am not opposed to the proposition in principle. You are very candid. I prefer it. I have found that indirection in these matters tends to produce confusion at the expense of everyone involved. She looked at him. I also prefer to know where I stand. He looked at the fire for a moment. That is a fair position. Thank you. A pause. And where do I stand? He did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer. She received it without visible reaction. I see, she said pleasantly. Well, the visit is 3 days. There is time. The parish gathering was on the 24th of November, a Wednesday, held in the assembly room above the coaching inn. It was an annual affair, ostensibly to raise subscriptions for the repair of the church roof, practically an occasion for Mossfield to take stock of itself and anyone new who had appeared in it since the summer. Nicholas attended because it would have been notable not to. Sophronia attended because she was his guest. Calloway attended because he would not have missed it for a considerable sum. Beatrice was there with her father. She wore the dark green gown again, which Nicholas recognized with a clarity that was inconvenient. She was talking to Mrs. Fenn when they arrived, with the ease of a woman on home ground, and she looked up when the party from Aldenvale entered with the expression of someone who has been told something and is now confirming it with her own eyes. He introduced Sophronia. Beatrice curtsied with perfect correctness. Sophronia inclined her head with equal correctness. They looked at each other with the frank, mutual attention of two women who have both immediately understood the situation and are deciding how to proceed. "Miss Claywell," Sophronia said, "I'm told you are responsible for the library's catalogue." "I am, or was at 19. I've been considering revisions." "I should like to see it. I have a weakness for catalogues." "An unusual weakness," Beatrice said. "I find them illuminating. A catalogue tells you a great deal about what a community considers worth organizing." Beatrice looked at her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite approval, but occupied the territory between them. Yes, that is exactly right." Sophronia smiled. It was a genuine smile, which made it worse in ways Nicholas could not have readily articulated. He excused himself to speak to Colonel Norris, because the Colonel was directly in his path, and there was no avoiding it. Behind him, he was aware of Beatrice and Sophronia continuing to talk, and of the conversation having, from its sound, moved on from catalogues to something that apparently required both of them to be amused. "Splendid woman, Lady Sophronia," said Colonel Norris. "Your Grace is to be congratulated." "Nothing is decided," Nicholas said. Of course. The Colonel's tone conveyed that he considered this a polite fiction. "And Miss Claywell, have you made her acquaintance? Clever girl. Shame about—" He gestured vaguely, as he had gestured before, at the entire circumstance of Beatrice's life. "Still, seems cheerful enough about it." Nicholas looked across the room at Beatrice, who was not cheerful or uncheerful, who was simply herself in her 2-year-old gown, talking to the woman who had been brought to replace whatever she was. He was watching her with an attention that was starting to be visible. He knew this because Calloway appeared at his elbow. "She's been here 11 minutes, Calloway said quietly, meaning Sophronia, "and she's already made a friend." "Sophronia is accomplished at—" "I meant Miss Claywell," Calloway said, and moved away before Nicholas could answer. Sophronia found him near the end of the evening, when the subscriptions had been collected, and the dancing, such as it was, 4 couples and Mr. Holt on the fiddle, had wound to a close. "Walk with me a moment," she said quietly. They moved to the shallow alcove beside the assembly room's main doorway, still within sight of the room, the door open behind them, but removed enough for private speech. It was cold and dim, and smelled of the coaching inn's particular mixture of straw and candle wax. "She is very good," Sophronia said without preamble. "I'm not certain who you mean." She looked at him with patient clarity. "Yes, you are." A pause. "She doesn't read like a woman who expects to be read," Sophronia continued. "She reads like someone who has simply always been worth reading and can wait for the rest of the world to notice." She paused. "I found that admirable. I also found it instructive." "Sophronia, I am not making a scene. I am not distressed. I am telling you something useful." She kept her voice even. "You have been in this town for 6 weeks. You are clearly not here for the drainage." He said nothing. "I can make myself agreeable for 3 days," she said, "and then I will go home. And if you wish to pursue this through the proper channels, I will receive that pursuit correctly. I have nothing against you. I have said so." She looked up at him. "But I think you should be honest with yourself about what you are doing and why, before someone gets hurt who doesn't deserve it." She did not wait for an answer. She went back into the assembly room with the composure of a woman who has said exactly what she meant and has no need to say it again. Nicholas stood in the alcove for a moment. Then he went back in because there was nothing else to do, and found Calloway and told him it was time to leave. The following morning, Thursday the 25th, Nicholas told Calloway what he had told no one in 3 years. It came out sideways, as things do. They were at breakfast discussing something else, and then abruptly they were not discussing something else. He told Calloway about Clara Holt Devereux, who was not related to his steward, who had been 26 and very beautiful and very clear. He now understood about what she wanted. She had wanted the Sinclair name attached to her brother's financial speculation, and she had wanted the Duke of Aldenvale in her drawing room when she entertained, and she had wanted, This was the part that had taken longest to understand, the idea of being a duchess more than she had wanted anything real. He had proposed in April. By August she had what she needed and had found a Belgian count. He told this story flatly in 3 paragraphs without self-pity. Calloway listened without interrupting, which was its own form of kindness. "I know," Calloway said when he was done. Nicholas looked at him. "I knew at the time," Calloway said. "I wasn't certain enough to say anything. I have regretted that." He paused. "Is that what you're doing here? Deciding whether you can trust your own judgment again?" Nicholas drank his tea. "I don't know what I'm doing here." "I think you do." He set down the cup. "She's a vicar's daughter." "Yes." "The practical obstacles are substantial and not insurmountable, and you know it." A pause. Outside, the grounds were silver with frost. Sophronia and her aunt would be leaving the following morning. "She makes me want to say what I mean," Nicholas said. He seemed mildly surprised to have said it. Calloway seemed mildly surprised to have heard it, which for Calloway meant very surprised indeed. "Then," Calloway said carefully, "perhaps you should consider doing that." That afternoon, Nicholas went to the library. It was a Thursday. He had not planned, or had not admitted to planning, this. He walked in to find the window seat empty. He was early. It was 1:15. He sat down. He sat for 20 minutes with a book he did not open. The slant of November light came through the south window and lay across the floor at the familiar angle. The library smelled of paper and cold. Mr. Petworth's shelving stood in its orderly rows of Latin. From the back room came the soft sound of Mrs. Petworth moving between shelves. At 1:30, the bell above the door sounded, and Beatrice came in. She stopped when she saw him. Just for a moment, barely perceptible unless you were watching for it, and then she unwound her shawl and crossed to the shelves. "You're early," she said. "I had nowhere pressing to be." She took a book from the shelf, turned it over, put it back, took another, came to the window seat and sat down. They were quiet for a time. The town moved outside, a cart, voices, the church clock marking the half-hour. He was aware of the foot of space between them, which had become over the weeks a specific distance, not accidental, not meaningful enough to address, but present the way a held breath is present. "Lady Sophronia is leaving tomorrow," he said. "I know. Mrs. Fenn mentioned it." "Of course she did." A pause. "She is—" He stopped. "Yes," Beatrice said as if he had finished the sentence. "She said something to me last evening." He looked at the window, at the grey November sky beyond it. "About honesty." Beatrice said nothing. She was reading or holding a book at any rate. "I have been—" He stopped again, tried again. "There is estate business. There is always estate business. That is not why I am still in Mossfield." The quality of her stillness changed. "Not much, enough." "No," she said at last. "I didn't suppose it was." He looked at her. She was looking at her book. Her hands, he noticed, were very still on the page. He was going to say something else, something that was closer to the point, something that had been accumulating for 6 weeks in window seats and evening fires and Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. And then the bell above the door sounded, and Mrs. Fenn came in with her daughter, and the moment closed like a book. He stayed until 3. They did not return to it. She was careful and bright and talked to Mrs. Fenn with every appearance of ease. He borrowed Plutarch's Lives, which was under Biographia, and which he had no intention of reading, and left at 3 when it became clear that nothing more was going to happen that afternoon. That evening he sat at his desk and wrote a letter. He addressed it to his mother. It was brief. It said that Lady Sophronia's visit had been pleasant, that she was everything his mother had described, and that he required more time before any decision could be considered. He sealed it. He put it on the tray for the morning post. He did not write the other letter, the one that would have gone 2 miles south to a vicarage in Mossfield, because he did not know yet what it would say. But he thought about the window seat and the specific quality of her stillness when he had said, "That is not why I am still in Mossfield," and he was fairly certain, for the first time in 3 years, that his own judgment was not entirely wrong. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, not settling, not yet, just a preliminary suggestion, and Mossfield received it with its usual composure. The letter from Bath arrived on a Tuesday, the 30th of November. Beatrice read it at the kitchen table while her father ate his breakfast, and the kitchen fire did its best against a morning that had decided firmly to be December. The letter was from a Mrs. Alderton of Laura Place, who required a companion, sensible, well-read, capable of conversation, and who had heard of Miss Claywell through the Norris family's connection to Bath. The terms were reasonable. The position would begin in the new year. She folded the letter and put it beside her plate. "Good news?" her father said without looking up from his egg. "A possibility." She poured her tea. "A companion position, Bath." Reverend Claywell set down his spoon. He looked at his daughter with the calm, unhurried attention of a man who has had 26 years to learn how she holds her face when she has already decided something and is not yet admitting it. "Bath," he said. "Mrs. Alderton of Laura Place, the Norris connection." "I know who Mrs. Alderton is." He picked up his spoon again. "Is it what you want?" "It is a sensible option." "That was not what I asked." She looked at the letter. Outside, the kitchen garden was white with frost, every stem and leaf glazed and precise in the morning light. "I am 26, she said. "I read philosophy in a lending library, and I catalogue books that no one uses, and I have very good conversations with—" She stopped. "With," her father said, "with people who are not going to be in Mossfield in January." She looked up. "Bath is sensible. Mrs. Alderton is respectable. I would have books and conversation and somewhere to be that is not here, waiting for. I would have somewhere to be." Reverend Claywell considered this for a moment. "Be certain of your reasons," he said. "That's all." She wrote back to Mrs. Alderton that afternoon. The reply was favourable within 4 days. Nicholas heard it from Calloway, who heard it from Holt, who had it from his wife, who had it from Mrs. Fenn. It reached him on a Friday, not a library day, in the form of Calloway appearing in the study doorway and saying with none of his usual lightness, "Miss Claywell has taken a position in Bath." Nicholas looked up from the letter he was reading, which was about a fence dispute between 2 tenants, and which had been requiring his attention for 10 minutes. "In January," Calloway added. Nicholas set the letter down, picked up his pen, set that down too. "I see," he said. Calloway said nothing. This was, as previously noted, the most alarming thing Calloway could do. Nicholas stood up. He took his coat from the chair. He went out. He did not go to the library. It was not a library day. He walked instead toward the town in the manner of a man with a destination, and arrived at the library and found it closed, and stood outside it for a moment in the cold, with his hand on the door that would not open. He looked through the south window at the empty window seat. He walked home. The following Tuesday, he arrived at the library at 1 o'clock, which was 90 minutes before she was due, and sat in the window seat with Plutarch's Lives open on his knee and read 30 pages, which was more Plutarch than he had read in a decade, and which he could not have summarized under any inducement. Mrs. Petworth appeared briefly from the back room, observed the situation with the discretion of a woman who has seen a great deal and catalogued none of it, and returned to her shelving. At 2:30 the bell rang. Beatrice came in with the composed brightness she had been wearing lately like a second shawl, warm, impenetrable, thoroughly arranged. She hung up her things. She went to the shelves. She came to the window seat and sat down with the 18 inches of deliberate space she had been maintaining since the afternoon Mrs. Fenn had interrupted them. "Plutarch," she said, glancing at his book. "I've been reading broadly. You said that about the tides. It remains true." She opened her own book. He turned a page of Plutarch. The church clock marked the quarter hour. Someone's cart went by on the cobbles outside with a sound like a dispute being settled badly. "I hear you are leaving in January," he said. A beat. News travels. "In Mossfield it has no choice." He looked at his book. "Mrs. Alderton of Laura Place." "You know Bath?" "I know Laura Place." He turned a page. "It is a good address. Mrs. Alderton is considered a reasonable employer as these things go." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "You made inquiries." "I heard a name and formed an opinion." "That is exactly what making inquiries is." He said nothing. Outside, a woman crossed the square with a basket and a child, the child running 2 steps ahead and 2 steps behind, in the random orbit of a child with somewhere exciting to be, and no memory of what it was. "Is it what you want?" he said. He had not planned to say it. He said it anyway. She looked at him then, directly, without the brightness, with the particular steadiness she had when she was about to say something she had prepared herself to mean. "It is what makes sense." "I asked what you wanted." "Those are sometimes the same thing." "Are they the same thing in this case?" They pause. The clock marked another quarter. She looked at her book, which she had not opened. "I am a vicar's daughter," she said quietly. who reads Latin and has opinions about Locke and has spent November in a window seat having the most interesting conversations of her life. She paused. And that is all I am going to say about that. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the closed book in her hands. Beatrice. Don't. She said it without sharpness, without anger, just steadiness, the kind that costs more than anger does. Please don't say something kind. I don't want something kind. He was quiet. I have made a sensible decision, she said, for sensible reasons, and I would like you to let me keep it. And if I don't want to let you keep it. She looked up. He held her gaze without flinching, without deflecting, without the careful calibration of distance he had maintained for 6 weeks. She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way she read everything, thoroughly and without mercy. Then, she said at last, you should have said so before I wrote to Mrs. Alderton. He opened his mouth. She stood up. I have letters to post, she said, and she put on her shawl and picked up her bag and walked to the door with the even steps of someone who is not hurrying because they cannot afford to be seen to hurry. The bell sounded. He sat in the window seat with Plutarch open and unread, and the afternoon light falling on the empty half of the seat beside him. In the back room, Mrs. Petworth made no sound at all. That evening, Sophronia's letter arrived. Not from Sophronia directly. It was from his mother, written the previous week, but it contained enclosed a brief note in Sophronia's hand that said the following. Your Grace, I believe I told you in November that I preferred candour. I will extend that preference one further occasion. I have since had several conversations about the question of my visit to Aldenvale with people who know us both, and I have concluded that I have no wish to be anyone's reasonable solution. I am not without other options, and I intend to pursue them. I wish you well. I think you know what you should do. S.V. He read it twice. He set it on the desk beside his mother's letter. He sat for a long time in the study, in the particular silence of a house that has never quite learned to be warm, and thought about Clara Holt Devereux, who had performed feeling so well that he had spent 3 years unable to trust his own. He thought about the window seat and don't say something kind and I don't want something kind. And he thought about the fact that a woman who does not want kindness is a woman who has already understood the situation clearly and has decided to protect herself from it. She was protecting herself from him, from what he had failed to say. He went to his desk and wrote a letter, not to his mother, not to Laura Place. He addressed it to himself, which was the only honest way he knew to test whether something was real. He set down what he knew and what he wanted and what he had refused to say while there was still time to say it easily, and then he read it back, and then he threw it in the fire because a man of 32 who writes letters to himself is a man who has run out of dignified options and should go do the thing instead. The fire consumed it efficiently. He went to bed. He did not sleep particularly well. The gathering at the Norris house was on the 8th of December, a small early Christmas affair, 6 or 7 families, nothing formal. Nicholas attended. Beatrice attended with her father. Calloway stayed at the estate claiming a headache which convinced no one and which freed the evening from the particular pressure of being observed by someone with Calloway's quality of observation. The rooms were warm, decorated with greenery from the surrounding woods, and smelled of the cider Mrs. Norris had been mulling since morning. Beatrice arrived after him, which meant he saw her come in. The green gown again, a different shawl, her hair simply dressed and her expression composed and pleasant and entirely out of reach. She was doing it deliberately. He understood that now. The brightness, the pleasant composure, these were the armor of a woman who has decided to feel nothing until she is somewhere she can afford to. He thought, I taught her this. She learned it from watching me. He crossed the room, because he was not going to stand at a distance and understand things about himself all evening. Miss Claywell. Oh, Your Grace, sir. Perfectly pleasant, perfectly correct. Are you well? Entirely. And you? I've been better. A flicker, just a flicker, quickly covered. I'm sorry to hear it. Are you? Yes, a pause. You look well. I'm not. She looked at him. The pleasantness slipped by about a fraction. You are being honest, he said. You told me you didn't want kindness. I'm attempting the alternative. This is not... She stopped, reset. This is not the place. Where would you prefer? Nowhere, she said very quietly. I would prefer nowhere because there is nothing left to say that would help. I haven't finished saying it. You haven't started. The fraction became a fault line. "You have been in Mossfield for 2 months, and you have said a great deal that was almost something. And I have. I have been very patient with almost, Your Grace, and I am now going to Bath." She stepped past him to speak to Mrs. Norris. He stood where she had left him for a moment, with the specific sensation of having deserved exactly what just happened. Colonel Norris appeared. "Fine evening, what? Mrs. Norris has done wonders with the greenery." "She has," Nicholas said. "Shame Miss Claywell's leaving. Clever girl." "Yes," said Nicholas, "she is." He spent the rest of the evening not watching her and making a poor job of it. She spent it talking to everyone in the room except him, with the ease and warmth of a woman who has been part of this place her whole life and knows that in a fortnight she will not be. In the carriage home in the dark he said nothing. The 1st of December had come and gone, while Nicholas was still deciding things. Beatrice was due to leave on the 22nd. This was known to everyone. Mrs. Fenn had organized a small farewell tea for the week prior. The library had been informed, which meant Beatrice had informed herself and had put in an advertisement in the town's notice book for a Tuesday and Thursday volunteer, and had begun, methodically and without announcement, to revise the catalogue sections she had always meant to improve. Nicholas knew she was leaving on the 22nd, because Holt had mentioned it with no particular intent, and because Mossfield had no other kind of information. He knew it with the specific, useless precision of a man who has been told the time of a train he has not booked passage on. He went to the library on Tuesday. She was not there. He had come at 1. He stayed until 2. He read 40 pages of Plutarch, which he was now actually reading, partly because Plutarch turned out to be excellent, and partly because he had run out of ways to be in a room without doing something with his hands. Mrs. Petworth brought him a cup of tea at 1:30 without being asked, set it on the sill beside him, and said nothing, which was the most tactful thing anyone had done for him in weeks. He went back on Thursday. She was there. She was reorganizing the back shelves with the focused efficiency of someone using occupation as a very fine-edged tool. She looked up when he came in. She did not come to the window seat. "I've been revising the catalogue," she said from the back of the room. "I can see." The history section was muddled. "I should have addressed it years ago." He sat down in the window seat. "Why didn't you?" "I had other things to read." He looked at the shelves she was sorting. She moved through them with the ease of a woman who knows every book by position, whose hands go to the right spine before the eye finds it. "Will there be a library in Bath?" he said. "There is a subscription library on Milsom Street, a good one." "Will you catalogue it?" She looked at him over the shelf. "I am a companion," she said. "I will accompany Mrs. Alderton to the pump room and read to her and manage her correspondence and her morning calls. I will not be cataloguing anything." He said nothing. "It is a good position," she said, returning to the shelf. "Beatrice." She stilled. "I owe you something," he said. "You owe me nothing." "An explanation, or something closer to honesty than I have managed." He looked at the window, at the cold grey December sky beyond it. "I have been cowardly. Not about you, about myself." She turned around. He did not look like a duke. He looked, she thought, like a man who has been carrying something in his coat pocket for a long time and has just decided to take it out. "A woman I intended to marry," he said, 3 years ago. She performed everything she thought I needed to see. She was exact about it. By the time I understood what I was looking at, I had given her everything she came for." He paused. "After that, I decided that what I felt was not reliable information." Beatrice was quiet. "You are the first person," he said, "who has made me doubt that decision." She looked at him for a long time. He did not fill the silence with anything, which was new for him and cost him considerably. "That is," she said at last, "a very honest thing to say. I am attempting the alternative. You suggested it. I suggested it at the Norris gathering when I was angry. You were right when you were angry." He looked at her. "You are frequently right." A pause. "You are telling me this now," she said carefully, 9 days before I leave." "Yes." "That is very poor timing." "I know." "Why now?" He looked at the window seat, at the empty half of it. "Because I watched you say goodbye to this room, and I could not sit here and let you revise the catalogue and leave without saying it." She was very still. "I am not asking you to do anything," he said. "I am not asking you to rescind the Bath letter, or to— I am not asking. I am saying what I should have said in October and in November and on every Tuesday and Thursday, that I came and read philosophy I did not need. He stood. He put Plutarch on the shelf, correctly filed under Biographia, because he had learned the catalogue months ago. You should know, he said, that you were never not worth my attention. From the first day I said otherwise to Calloway, because I was already frightened of how wrong I was. He crossed to the door. The window seat, she said. He stopped. You're leaving it, she said. It's Thursday until 4, it's yours. He went out. The bell rang. Through the south window she watched him cross the square, not hurrying, not lingering, just walking, until he turned the corner toward the estate road and was gone. She stood in the middle of the library for a moment. Then she went to the window seat and sat down. The seat was warm where he had been. She sat there for a long time without reading anything at all. Calloway said nothing when Nicholas came home. He had been reading in the library, the one at the estate, and he looked up when Nicholas came in and assembled his expression into something neutral. Well, he said after a moment. I told her. All of it? Enough of it. Calloway set down his book. And? She is still leaving on the 22nd. A pause. You gave her 9 days' notice of your feelings. Yes. Nicholas. I know. Calloway was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? Nicholas sat down across the fire. I don't know what I'm entitled to do. You are entitled to... I said something real to her. I waited 2 months to say it. She has made a reasonable decision and she should not be asked to unmake it on the strength of 9 days and a speech in a library. He looked at the fire. She was right. The timing was very poor. Then improve it. He said nothing. Nicholas. Calloway leaned forward. I'm going to tell you something without wit or irony because the occasion requires it. He waited until Nicholas looked at him. You are the only person I have ever known who is genuinely intelligent, genuinely decent, and genuinely determined to stand in his own way at every available opportunity. Clara Holt Devereux was a dishonest woman who exploited your trust and left you deciding that trust itself was the problem. It was not. She was. A pause. Beatrice Claywell is in a lending library 2 miles from here, revising a catalogue because it is the last useful thing she can do before she goes somewhere she doesn't want to go, because she is too proud to wait for a man who has been almost saying something for 2 months. Those are 2 very different situations. Nicholas looked at the fire. Go and do something, Calloway said, before the 22nd. He was quiet for a long time, then, what if I'm still wrong? About her? About what I see, about what I think what if I have made the same mistake again? Calloway picked up his book. Then you will have made a different mistake for better reasons, and you will survive it, and I will be here. He opened to his page. But you are not wrong. You have not been wrong since October. 3 days before she was due to leave, Nicholas walked into Mossfield. Not rode, walked because the morning was clear and cold and he needed the 2 miles. He had no particular plan, which was unusual for him, and which he had decided was probably necessary. The market was busy. It was Saturday and December, and the town had the particular industrious warmth of a place preparing for Christmas. He moved through it without purpose, stopping once at the bookseller's for no reason except that it was there, and emerging with a copy of the 2nd volume of The Natural History of British Birds, which Beatrice had still not returned to the library, and which he suspected she had simply absorbed into her own shelves and forgotten. He was standing outside the bookseller's with this book under his arm when he heard her voice. She was 20 feet away with a basket in each hand, coming out of the draper's, talking to Mrs. Fenn over her shoulder. She was wearing a coat he had not seen before, dark wool, a little large, probably her father's, and her hair had been pushed about by the wind. She saw him. Mrs. Fenn said something. Beatrice answered without looking away from him. Mrs. Fenn, who was many things but was not unobservant, said a pleasant goodbye and took herself off with the tact of a woman who has seen everything in a market town and knows when to be elsewhere. Nicholas crossed to her. You have 2 baskets, he said. I am aware. Allow me. He took the heavier one before she could decline. She looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to argue about something and had concluded it was not worth the effort. They walked. The market moved around them. Children, carts, a dog with unclear intentions. 2 women comparing ribbon at the haberdasher's window. He carried the basket. She walked beside him with her own basket and said nothing, and he said nothing, and it was the most natural and the most impossible thing he had done in recent memory. "Birds," she said, glancing at the book under his arm. "Volume 2. "I have Volume 1. "I know, you borrowed it in October and have not returned it." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you cataloguing my borrowing habits now?" "You catalogued mine." "That was different." "Was it?" They reached the end of the market square. The vicarage was 2 streets further. He kept walking because she had not asked him to stop. "I am leaving in 3 days," she said. "I know." "The position in Bath is a good position," he said. "You have said so." "It is?" "Beatrice." He stopped. She stopped beside him, and they were standing at the corner of the square where the road turned south toward the vicarage and north toward the estate. "I am not going to ask you to stay." She looked at him. "I told you on Thursday what I should have told you in October. That was mine to say, and it was said badly and late, and I am not going to compound that by asking you to rearrange your life on the strength of it." "Then why are you here?" "Because I walked into town and you were in front of the draper's, and there are 2 baskets." He paused. "And because I could not watch you go without being honest, once, properly, not almost." She looked at him for a long moment. "You have been honest," she said, "on Thursday." "Partially." "What's left?" He was quiet for a moment. "That I have not looked forward to a Tuesday or Thursday since October because of the philosophy. That I cannot sit in the window seat the way I used to." He stopped. "That is probably obvious." "It is not obvious," she said quietly. "Nothing about you is obvious." He looked at the basket in his hand, at the 2nd volume of the Natural History of Birds, at the market square where Mossfield was doing its Saturday business, with perfect indifference to the conversation happening at its corner. "Go to Bath," he said. "If it is what you need, I am not asking you to do otherwise." He held out the basket. "But I want you to know that when you come back, if you come back, the window seat will be there." She took the basket. Her fingers were cold. "You'll have read all the way to Z by then," she said. "I expect so." He held out the book. Volume 2. She took it, looked at him. Her eyes were very bright, which was either the wind or something else, and he did not know her well enough, or knew her too well to ask. "Thank you," she said. She walked south. He stood at the corner and watched her go until she turned into the vicarage gate and was gone. And then he stood there a moment longer, alone at the axis of Mossfield, with December around him and the book no longer in his hand. Behind him, somewhere in the market, Calloway said, "I followed you." "I know," Nicholas said. "You should have." "I know," he turned. "Not yet." Calloway looked at him for a moment. Then he fell into step beside him, and they walked north toward the estate without speaking. The 20th of December was a Monday. Beatrice spent it in the way she had spent the preceding week, sorting, giving away, reducing her 26 years in Mossfield to what would fit in 2 trunks and a hat box. The books were the difficulty. She had more than she'd counted on. Some went to her father's shelves. Some went to the library, with a note in her own hand tucked inside the cover of each one, describing why it was worth reading, which was the most useful thing she could think to do with the hours that remained. She did not go to the library on the Saturday after Nicholas had carried her basket, because it was not a library day. She did not go on the Monday because she was packing. She had decided she would go on Tuesday, the last Tuesday she was entitled to, and that she would sit in the window seat and read for 2 hours and say goodbye to it properly, which was more than she had said goodbye to many things. She went on Tuesday at 2 o'clock and found him there. He had a book which he was not reading. He looked up when she came in, and there was a moment, brief, unguarded, in which he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had arrived too early somewhere and was profoundly aware of it. In the back room, Mrs. Petworth's footsteps moved quietly along the shelves, steadily and without hurry. She hung up her coat. She came to the window seat. She sat down. He did not speak. She did not speak. The library was warm for the first time in weeks. Someone had seen to the fire. Outside, the square was quiet, the town in the slow inhale between activities. "You're here," she said. "It's Tuesday." "It is." She looked at the book on his knee. "Plutarch. I've been reading it since November. He's better than I expected." History usually is. She opened her own book, which she had carried from home and had no particular intention of reading today. "Volume 2, she said, "of the birds. I finished it. Was it good? The section on migratory patterns was excellent. She looked at her page. I've been thinking about migration. Have you? The birds that leave in winter, whether they go because they must or because they choose. He was quiet for a moment. Does the book address that? Not directly. It implies they go because the conditions require it and return when the conditions allow. That, he said carefully, sounds like a reasonable arrangement. She turned a page she had not read. It does. Outside, 2 women crossed the square with baskets. The church clock began to mark the hour. 3 o'clock. She had been here longer than she'd thought, or time had moved differently today. He closed Plutarch. She looked at him. There is something I did not say on Saturday, he said, because I was trying very hard to be honorable about it, and I said what I thought was the right thing, which was that I was not asking you to stay. Yes. That was true, he said, and it was incomplete. She set her book down. I am not asking you to stay, he said again. I am telling you because I told you once I would attempt honesty, and I intend to maintain it, that I do not want you to go. Those are not the same request. One is a demand on your life. The other is a fact about mine. He looked at the window, at the grey December sky, at the specific patch of light the south window threw even in winter. I have been in this seat since 1 o'clock. I could not, he stopped. You've been here 2 hours, she said. I had Plutarch. Nicholas. He looked at her. The word, his name, without the title, without irony, just his name in her voice, did something to his face she had not seen before and that she thought he had not let himself do in a long time. Ask me, she said. A pause. I don't know that I have the right. You do. She turned to face him fully, the book set aside, the window seat between them diminished to nothing. You have been here since October, and you carried my basket, and you filed Plutarch correctly under Biographia, and you had the window seat chair repaired before I came back the second morning. She paused. Ask me. He looked at her. Stay, he said. Not an order, barely a word, just stay. She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment he understood, with the particular clarity of a man who has learned to read her pauses, that she had already decided. The position in Bath, she said, has not yet begun. No. It would be possible to write to Mrs. Alderton. It would. A letter rescinding, citing changed circumstances. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back without the careful distance, without the calibration, with nothing between him and what he meant. I am a vicar's daughter, she said. To you are Beatrice Claywell, he said, who catalogued a library at 19 and argues Locke correctly, and has occupied that window seat for longer than I have been in this county, and I have not thought about anything except you since the 14th of October. She was quiet. The practical considerations are considerable and not insurmountable, and I would like very much to consider them with you rather than around you, if you will permit it. The church clock marked the quarter. Outside, Mossfield went on being Mossfield, unhurried, indifferent, endlessly itself. The fire in the grate settled with a small sound. Your mother, she said, will have opinions. She will. Strongly held ones. She usually does. She is also, when presented with a fact rather than a supposition, reasonable. You have considerable faith in her reasonableness. I have, he said, considerable faith in your capacity to make yourself impossible to dismiss. I have watched you do it since October. She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her face, not the composure, not the brightness, but whatever had been underneath them both, the thing she had been carefully protecting for 2 months, settled into something quieter, something that did not need protecting any more. I will write to Mrs. Alderton, she said. He exhaled. This afternoon, she added, while it is still a decision and not simply an inevitability. Of course. And you will need to speak to your mother. I will write today. In plain terms. In the plainest terms I possess. She looked at him. He looked back. The window seat was the window seat. The same sloping floor, the same winter light, the same Latin catalogue keeping its orderly rows. Nothing in the room had changed. He reached out, not dramatically, not with excess, and took her hand, which was still cold despite the fire, and held it in both of his as if it were something he intended to be careful with. She let him. They sat like that for a moment, the library quiet around them, Mrs. Petworth's footsteps a distant reassurance in the back room. Then Beatrice looked at him, at the hazel eyes and the careful face and the man who had spent 2 months arriving early to a window seat, and she said, "You should know that I have been thinking about this since the 14th of October as well." "I suspected," he said, "and did not presume." That, she said, was either very gentlemanly or very aggravating. Possibly both. She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the first he had heard from her without irony in it, and he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been trying not to want for 2 months and has finally stopped pretending. He raised her hand and pressed his lips to her fingers, which was what was permitted, and what was permitted was, at this moment, entirely sufficient. She did not look away. "The letter to Mrs. Alderton," she said when he lowered her hand. "Yes." "I should write it before I lose my nerve." "You don't have nerves." "I have excellent nerves," she said. "I simply don't show them to people who haven't earned it." He looked at her. "And have I?" She stood gathering her things and paused at the door with the quality of stillness she had when she meant every word of what she was about to say. "You filed the Plutarch correctly," she said. "Under Biographia in October. I learned the catalogue." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "You have." The bell rang. He sat in the window seat alone and looked at Plutarch, which he had nearly finished, and found that Plutarch had rather a lot to say about patience and its rewards, and that he agreed with most of it. The letter to Mrs. Alderton was written that evening at the kitchen table, while Reverend Claywell read beside the fire, and said nothing beyond asking whether she wanted more tea. She did want more tea. He brought it, he set it down. He went back to his chair and after a moment said, without looking up from his book, "I'm glad the weather held." "It's December," Beatrice said. "It's freezing." Said her father and turned a page. Nicholas's letter to his mother was 4 paragraphs. The first addressed Lady Sophronia Vane. No further pursuit. Sophronia had already been gracious, no action required. The second addressed his own intentions, which were, for the first time in his correspondence with his mother, stated without hedging. The third addressed Beatrice Claywell, her father, her education, her quality, in exactly those terms because his mother understood quality, and he was not going to pretend she didn't. The 4th paragraph was 1 sentence. "I am asking you to be reasonable, and I believe you will be, because you have always been reasonable about the things that mattered, even when you were unreasonable about everything else." He sealed it. He gave it to Holt for the Morning Post. He went to find Calloway. Calloway was in the drawing-room with his book, in the posture of a man who had not been listening at all. "Well?" said Calloway. "I asked her to stay." Calloway set his book down with a small, deliberate motion and raised his wine-glass in Nicholas's direction. "Finally," he said. "Thank you for your patience. I have been enormously patient. Saintly, I expect this acknowledged." "I acknowledge it." "At the wedding," Calloway said, 1 sentence, a toast. "Calloway, I have been composing it since November." He drank. "It opens with a remark about Plutarch." Nicholas sat down. The fire was very good. The room was warm in a way he was only now noticing it could be. "She said," he offered after a moment, "that the window seat will need a decision eventually." "Whose it is?" "In the formal sense." Calloway looked at the fire. "She'll keep it, you know that." "I know," said Nicholas. "I intend to sit in it with her." "Good," said Calloway simply. "That's the correct answer." The Dowager Duchess of Aldenvale arrived in Mossfield on the 3rd of January. She had not been invited. She had been informed, which she appeared to consider equivalent. She came in the Aldenvale travelling carriage with her lady's maid and an expression of determined assessment that Nicholas recognized as the face she wore when she had already made up her mind but intended to make the process look thorough. He met her in the hall. She looked at him for a moment. "You might have warned me," she said. "I wrote 4 paragraphs. You wrote 4 paragraphs about a vicar's daughter, as though you were presenting evidence to a magistrate." She removed her gloves. "Where is she?" "I have not arranged—" "I should like to meet her, today if she is willing." Beatrice was willing. She came to the estate that afternoon with her father, whose presence Reverend Claywell offered with the quiet practicality of a man who has understood the situation for some time and considers it his duty to be useful. The Dowager Duchess sat with Beatrice for 40 minutes in the drawing-room, while Nicholas remained in the hall with Calloway, who was finding the situation very nearly too entertaining to contain. "You could listen at the door," Calloway suggested. "I will not listen at the door." "I could listen at the door." "I will also not listen at the door." At the end of 40 minutes, the drawing-room door opened. The Dowager Duchess appeared. She looked at Nicholas with the expression she had worn when he was 12 years old and had done something she had not expected and could not quite disapprove of. "She corrected my understanding of the Reformation," his mother said, accurately. A pause. "I found it refreshing." She went to speak to Reverend Claywell. Nicholas went into the drawing-room. Beatrice was standing by the window, looking out at the grounds with the composed expression of someone who has just navigated something demanding and is not going to admit how demanding it was. "Well," he said, "she asked me about my education, my father's connections, and my opinion of the present government." She turned. "And then she asked me whether I loved you, which I was not expecting." He was very still. "What did you say?" She looked at him with the particular steadiness that meant every word was considered. "I said that I had sat in a window seat with you for 2 months and had come to understand that you are the most honest person I have ever met when you are not being deliberately impossible." A pause. "And that, yes, I did." He crossed the room. He took her face in his hands, carefully as he did everything with her, and kissed her, which was not what was strictly permitted and was entirely necessary. She did not appear to object. When he stepped back, she looked at him with an expression he had not seen before, not the composure, not the wit, but something underneath both, simple and unguarded, and entirely her. "Your mother," she said, "is in the next room." "She is." "And Calloway is almost certainly in the hall." "He is." "Then you had better," she said, "go and speak to my father." He spoke to Reverend Claywell that afternoon in the estate's small study in plain terms. The Reverend listened with the patient attention of a man who had known this conversation was coming since October and had been quietly glad of it. "She is," the Reverend said when Nicholas had finished, "the best person I know. I say that without bias because I am her father and am therefore entirely biased, but also because it is simply true." He looked at Nicholas steadily. "You understand what you are asking, not just of her." "I do. She will not be quiet about things she believes. She will not defer to rank when she thinks rank is wrong. She will catalogue your library and rearrange it in Latin and consider this an improvement." "I am aware of all of this." "And you want it anyway." "I want it," Nicholas said, specifically. Reverend Claywell looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, of course, with my very great goodwill." They were married in March, in the church at Mossfield, which was small and cold and had a roof that was still awaiting repair from the parish subscription. Calloway stood up with Nicholas and delivered a toast at the wedding breakfast that did, in fact, open with a remark about Plutarch and was, against all probability, genuinely moving. The Dowager Duchess sat in the front pew in a hat of formidable construction and cried in a manner she later described as entirely due to the cold. Mrs. Fenn had information about the proceedings disseminated throughout Mossfield before the wedding party had reached the estate. Mrs. Petworth, asked her opinion of the match, said that she had seen it coming since October, which was earlier than anyone else admitted to, and which she considered a matter of professional observation. Reverend Claywell preached the following Sunday on the subject of patience as a form of faith. Several members of the congregation felt it was the finest sermon he had ever given. He did not explain where it had come from. The library on Tuesdays and Thursdays remained the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The window seat remained the window seat. On the first Tuesday of April, a woman in an excellent shawl arrived at 2 o'clock precisely, arranged herself in the left half of the seat with one foot tucked beneath her, and opened a book. 12 minutes later, the bell above the door rang, and a man with hazel eyes and a copy of Plutarch, finished finally and returned correctly filed under Biographia, sat down in the right half without being invited and without being asked to leave. Mrs. Petworth made tea for 2 and brought it to the window without comment. Outside, Mossfield went about its business in the April light, unhurried and endlessly itself, entirely indifferent to the fact that the window seat had, at last, been settled.